Hello, welcome to North Central's webinar series on the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Daniela Barberis. I'm a historian of science and a faculty member of the Shimer Grey Book School at North Central College, where I teach in the social and the natural sciences programs. I will be talking today about how the COVID-19 crisis has changed our relationship with big tech. One can say that the pandemic has sped up a future that we had envisaged, but had not yet come into being. A future where many of our activities are mediated through computer or phone screens and where other humans are kept at a distance. During the shutdown, more Americans started working from home, learning from home, shopping from home, using telehealth, remote learning, teleconferencing, e-commerce and delivery services, and became used to the comfort offered by their ease of use and efficacy. The adoption of these technologies was seen as necessary and therefore happened with less scrutiny than would have been the case during normal conditions. Today, I'm going to be looking at a number of these technological adoptions and discussing what is at stake in these changes if they should become permanent after the corona crisis is over, assuming it will ever be over. Some of the downsides of distance interaction became clear to many of us. Social isolation, loneliness, difficulties in distance learning, for example. Other concerns, such as the growing wealth, power, and influence of tech companies, are also becoming clear. For better or for worse, the pandemic is creating a new version of normality with new patterns of economic ownership, as this headline from the tech section of the New York Times shows. I'm just going to read the headline. The economy is in record decline, but not for the tech giants. So in this moment, in which the economy is generally doing very poorly, the tech giants stand out as making significant profits, and this is increasing their power. Recently, as widely reported by the media, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, you can see on the slide in the center, announced that the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, on the left, will be heading a panel to reimagine New York State's post-COVID reality with an emphasis on permanently integrating technology into every aspect of civic life. Schmidt said that, I quote, "The first priorities of what we're trying to do are focused on telehealth, remote learning, and broadband. We need to look for solutions that can be presented now and accelerated and use technology to make things better," end quote. Just one day earlier, Cuomo had announced a similar partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop a smarter education system. These companies are treating the pandemic as an opportunity to bring the future into being, a permanent, no-touch future. The CEO of SteerTech, a company selling self-parking technology, summed up the new sales pitch in this way. There has been a distinct warming up to humanless, contactless technology. Humans are biohazards. Machines are not. This future is a future in which our homes are no longer just personal spaces. They will become, via high-speed digital connectivity, our schools, our doctors' offices, our gyms, and our offices. Of course, for many of us, our homes were already turning into never-off workplaces and entertainment venues before the pandemic. But if tech companies have their way, this trend is here to stay. In this future, almost everything will be home delivered, either virtually via streaming and cloud services or physically via e-delivery or drone, and then shared on social media or platforms mediated through our screens. It will be a cashless future with fewer teachers, doctors, and drivers as all these professions become virtual. This future claims to be run on artificial intelligence, but is actually held together by tens of millions of anonymous workers tucked away in warehouses, data centers, content moderation mills, electronic sweatshops, lithium mines, industrial farms, meat processing plants, and prisons, where they're all at higher risk of catching disease and have fewer worker protections and marginal pay. It's a future in which our every move, every word, every relationship will be traceable, trackable, data mineable by an unprecedented collaboration between government and tech giants. But should we be concerned at the idea that public schools, hospitals, doctors' offices, police and military will outsource or are already outsourcing many of their core functions to private tech companies? Some arguments in favor of this expansion point to China, its technology companies, and the huge amount of data China enables companies to collect, and that its government uses for social control of its citizens. Schmidt, the former CEO of Google that I was talking about earlier, has been making the argument to American lawmakers and to the general public that since the Chinese government is spending large amounts of public money building the infrastructure of high-tech surveillance, while allowing Chinese tech companies such as Alibaba, Baidu, and Huawei to pursue its commercial applications, the US's dominant position in the tech world is significantly endangered. China is pulling ahead of the US in a number of fields connected to AI, including medical diagnosis, facial recognition, autonomous vehicles, and cashless commerce. There are many reasons for China's competitive edge, including the sheer size of its population, few regulatory barriers, and cooperation between private companies and government entities. For example, China solved its lack of legacy banking by skipping over credit cards and going straight into huge e-commerce and digital service market using digital payments. It has a severe doctor shortage, which led the government to work closely with tech companies such as Tencent to use AI for predictive medicine. In China, tech companies tend to quickly clear regulatory barriers, while American initiatives encounter a much more robust regulatory environment. These days, the most acute standoff between the two countries is over who will dominate the next generation of technologies. Until recently, executives in Silicon Valley tended to belittle China's potential in tech, arguing that rigid controls in politics and education would dampen innovation. But that view no longer prevails. As reported by Evan Osnos in The New Yorker, under a plan called Made in China 2025, Beijing has directed billions in subsidies and research funds to help Chinese companies surpass foreign competitors on such fields as electric vehicles and robotics. A Pentagon report commissioned under the Obama administration warned that the U.S. was losing cutting-edge technology to China, not only through theft, but also through Chinese involvement in joint ventures and tech startups. It prompted Congress in 2018 to tighten rules on foreign investment and export controls. The U.S. does not have a 5G alternative to compete with China, a failure that cannot be blamed on spying. As a share of the economy, America's federal investment in research and development is at its lowest point since 1955. If America does not compete with China's advances, it will lose a voice in deciding the ethics of some troubling new technologies. Osnos, the New York Times writer, writes that since 2017, China has erected an unprecedented digital and physical enclosure around Muslims in Xinjiang region. It is estimated that more than 1 million people have been interned in facilities known officially as vocational training centers. Millions more are tracked every day by facial recognition cameras, fingerprints, cell phone patterns, and biometric data collected through a program of mandatory exams known as Physicals for All. Multiple Chinese provinces have taken to collecting DNA samples in order to improve population management and control, as one police notice put it. The prospect of China extending or exporting the Xinjiang model has exposed the stakes in the future of intrusive technology. The situation that is playing out in the 5G contest will soon play out in facial recognition, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. As the pandemic accelerates big tech's insinuation into government affairs, The industry's most powerful companies will almost certainly exploit their relationship with government agencies to damage less powerful rivals and to extract valuable contracts. But the companies will also provide valuable information to their Washington clients, increasing government powers for good or ill. We've recently seen the CEOs of 4 big tech companies, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Facebook, questioned before Congress about their potential breaking of antitrust laws. While this is definitely a concern, I am trying to show that the tentacles of these companies spread beyond what antitrust legislation is capable of addressing. As I noted before, the future that is coming into place faster because of the pandemic was already in the works. To take an example, before the pandemic, millions of Americans already relied on Amazon for the convenience of its 1- and 2-day shipping. Amazon delivered nearly 3.5 billion packages globally last year, and this does not count Amazon orders delivered by partners such as the U.S. Postal Service or UPS. COVID-19 shelter-in-place orders and the temporary shuttering of many physical retailers only increased dependence on the company, transforming it from a convenient service to an essential one. Amazon's sales and Prime membership subscriptions shot up from January to March. In the US, the company hired 100,000 new workers between mid-March and mid-April, and then went on to create another 75,000 jobs. Its stock price has soared by more than 50% since the beginning of April, and Amazon's founder, Jeff Bezos, has seen his wealth increase by $30 billion during the pandemic alone, as these next slides show. So you can see here a headline from NPR: Amazon doubles profit to $5.2 billion as online shopping spikes. And as I said earlier, this is in contrast to the rest of the economy, as you can see in this other headline, right? 3 months of hell. U.S. economy drops 32.9% in the worst GDP report ever. So there's this clear contrast between the fortunes of big tech and the crisis of other economic endeavors. We may find that we've stumbled onto what is called an Amazon recovery, where big business and corporate behemoths hold an even greater share of the market as small and medium enterprises go bankrupt, allowing further consolidation of power by the largest firms. A democratic society can't flourish under conditions of unrestrained inequality, and will be even more in danger in an economy where wealth and power are further concentrated than they already are. These issues aren't entirely new. Well before the pandemic, Amazon was growing in strides despite reports of grueling and sometimes dangerous conditions at its warehouses. As a former Amazon VP who recently resigned, Tim Bray, put it, "The goodness that Amazon offers customers, low prices, endless selection, quick delivery, isn't free. Right now, the downside of all this goodness is overwhelmingly being experienced by the warehouse workers." In the past 25 years, the company grew from an online bookstore to one of the world's most valuable companies, going beyond e-commerce to cloud computing, streaming services, and brick-and-mortar grocery stores, such as Whole Foods, which it acquired recently. When we talk about Amazon, we're talking about the future of work. Other employers, seeing Amazon's success and trying to survive in a competitive environment, look to replicate its success, including its working conditions. In light of the pandemic's life or death consequences, assessing the future of work and Amazon's role in it is more urgent than ever. What happens inside Amazon's warehouses doesn't just affect its employees. It will impact the rest of us too. As Robert Reich, the former U.S. Secretary of Labor, stated, Amazon is, I quote, "a technological leader, the first place where most Americans turn to shop online, and a hugely influential political power. So, its employee practices are watched and likely to be emulated by every other big American company. When it treats its workers badly, those tawdry practices reverberate across the country. Amazon has been ascending to dominance for years, but the pandemic has sped this process up. What do its employees, who are a key part of the success, deserve? And what power should they have in shaping the direction of the company? What is the impact of all this on Amazon's ever-growing base of customers? Will they demand changes from the company and from other retailers that imitate its business practices? Amazon provides not only e-delivery, but also Amazon Web Services, and potentially sits at the heart of every home with its Echo devices. It also delivers services to the CIA, NASA, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE. So, like other big tech companies I discussed earlier, it is deeply insinuated into government affairs and becoming increasingly indispensable to both government and individuals in their private lives. Should any private company hold such power? Who does it answer to, ultimately? These developments are new and unprecedented, and we are to some extent in uncharted territory. I'm now going to turn to our third topic, the development of a cashless society. I'm going to start with a quote. We're living through an amazing global social experiment that is forcing governments, businesses, and consumers to rethink their operating models and norms for social interactions, said Morten Jorgensen, director of a consulting firm specializing in banking technology, cards, and payments. We have a world in which there is less contact. People's habits are changing as we speak. These changes have created a golden moment for credit card companies, banks, and digital platforms, which are capitalizing on the crisis to advance a cashless revolution by encouraging consumers and retailers to use card and smartphone apps that yield lucrative fees. Payment and processing companies such as PayPal, whose stock is up about 55% this year, and IDN, based in the Netherlands, which is up 72%, also stand to gain. So do data analytics and fraud prevention companies and businesses that enable merchants to accept card payments. The surge in online shopping fueled by homebound consumers is propelling the trend. In the US, 40 million customers went online for groceries in April. Credit card companies are keeping the momentum going by working with banks and governments to lift ceilings on contactless payments such as tap and pay, and enticing shoppers to increase the number and value of their purchases. Visa, the credit card company, reported a surge in contactless payments for basic items in Britain after limits were lifted, and a 100% increase from a year ago in the United States. Visa is working with other governments in Greece, Ireland, Malta, Poland, and Turkey to raise contactless payment limits. Card companies don't divulge fee earnings, but it is clear card issuers are raking in a handsome profit as businesses pay more fees. And this is without considering the large fees customers have to pay for late payments, accidental overdrafts, etc. There is no medical evidence that cash transmits the virus. Nonetheless, perceptions of cash as dirty and as potentially spreading pathogens are changing behavior. The authorities that manage the world's currencies say the dangers of going fully cashless are rife. They're still trying to figure out what a cash-free future would mean. Consumer groups warn that vulnerable people risk being marginalized. Many low-income earners and retirees, as well as some immigrants and people with disabilities, have little or no access to electronic payments, or to the internet for that matter, and are increasingly shut out of banks as banks cut back on ATMs and customer services. Small businesses find the 3% transaction fees onerous. While a transition to entirely cashless transactions is still a way off, the shift in attitudes towards physical cash brought on by the pandemic is unlikely to be reversed. The tracking of every purchase also expands data mining opportunities. This is an opportunity for data gathering and information selling companies to scrape away unabashedly huge caches of information about people's locations, habits, and possible future behavior, and thus develop predictive technologies further. Much of what happens to our data happens inside a black box. We don't control it, and we don't know what is being collected, who has access to it, and what it is being used for. And few of us really understand the artificially intelligent technology that we're introducing into our lives, from smart assistants that listen in our homes, to the artificial intelligence systems that screen job applications, surveil our faces, and try to influence our decisions, from our shopping habits to our votes. Monetizing our data has been called surveillance capitalism, a term popularized by Shoshana Zuboff, who has emerged as the leading figure discussing and critiquing this novel form of economic and social power represented by Facebook, Google, and a handful of other tech giants who collect our every click and utterance. AI has the potential to make our lives more efficient, more convenient, frictionless, as the jargon goes. We should be concerned, however, about how biases coded into the algorithms powering this technology could make life harder for the most vulnerable people in our society. Tech platforms that store your photos, send you emails, and connect you with friends and family around the world may not cost you money to use, but they are not free. As a cliche goes, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. Zuboff makes it more extreme. She compares the big tech platforms to elephant poachers and our personal data to ivory tusks. You are not the product, she says. You are the abandoned carcass. Zuboff says that we're living through such a bold and unprecedented shift in capitalist methods that the American public doesn't yet grasp the new dispensation in its entirety. While people take care to calibrate their privacy settings just so, sharing certain things, keeping other things private, the data is still being collected and shared among apps for possible monetization now or later. Google and Facebook, she argues, are run by people who have turned out to be as ruthless and profit-seeking as any Gilded Age tycoon. Instead of mining the natural landscape, surveillance capitalists extract their raw material from human experience. This business model emerged almost by accident. Zuboff describes how Google, in its early days, happened to keep a cache of data byproducts, spelling, click patterns, location, that were produced by each search. Initially, tech companies only used this data to improve their user interface and user experience, an experience that was offered up for free. Up to that point, Google had relied on venture capital backers while developing the quality of its product. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, the company had to figure out how to make money for its investors. It decided to sell advertising. Not the old-fashioned ads, but a new and improved kind. Relevant and targeted ads that used all the detailed behavioral information Google had collected from users. This new market form revealed that serving the needs of the users is less lucrative than selling predictions of their future behavior. Whatever sentiments the new capitalists may express, or even believe, about building community or democratizing knowledge have been subordinated to the brute demands of economic survival, leading to the relentless accumulation of additional data sources and ardent lobbying against government regulation. Thus, we have Google buying YouTube and Facebook acquiring Instagram and WhatsApp, accumulating further data. We often say we live in a digital age. It would be more accurate to say that we live in an algorithmically curated era. That is, a period when many of our choices and perceptions are shaped by machine learning algorithms that nudge us in directions that are of commercial interest to those who employ the programmers who write the necessary code. The development of these algorithms is made possible and increasingly precise by the accumulation of big data. Tracking entire populations to combat the pandemic now could open the doors to more invasive forms of government snooping later. Pandemic tracking apps in Europe and Asia have raised privacy concerns for individual users. As countries around the world race to contain the pandemic, many are deploying digital surveillance tools as a means to exert social control, even turning security agency technologies on their own civilians. Health and law enforcement authorities are understandably eager to use every tool available to stop the spread of the virus. However, these surveillance efforts threaten to alter the balance between public safety and personal privacy on a global scale. For example, in South Korea, government agencies are harnessing surveillance camera footage, smartphone location data, and credit card purchase records to help trace the recent movements of coronavirus patients and to establish virus transmission chains. In Lombardy, Italy, the authorities are analyzing location data transmitted by citizens' mobile phones to determine how many people are obeying a government lockdown order and the typical distances they move every day. In Israel, the country's internal security agency is using a cache of mobile phone location data, originally intended for counterterrorism operations, to try to pinpoint citizens who may have been exposed to the virus. Yet, ratcheting up surveillance to combat the pandemic now could permanently change individuals' capacity to keep their lives private. Civil liberties experts warned that this could be similar to what happened after September 11, 2001. In the quest to combat terrorism, civil liberties were eroded. Nearly 2 decades later, law enforcement agencies have access to high-powered surveillance systems like fine-grained location tracking and facial recognition, technologies that can be repurposed to further political agendas like anti-immigration policies. Civil liberties experts warn that the public has little recourse to challenge these digital exercises of state power. We could easily end up in a situation where we empower local, state, or federal governments to take measures in response to the pandemic that fundamentally change the scope of American civil rights. In hundreds of cities in China, the government is requiring citizens to use software on their phones that automatically classifies each person with a color code, red, yellow, or green. You can see a little drawing of that in the corner of this picture on the PowerPoint. The green little box on your phone, on the phone. This color code, red, yellow, or green, indicates the contagion risk the person represents. The software determines which people should be quarantined or permitted to enter public places like subways. But officials have not explained how the system makes such decisions, and citizens have felt powerless to challenge it. In Singapore, the Ministry of Health has posted information online about each coronavirus patient, often in stunning detail, including relationships with other patients. The idea is to warn individuals who may have crossed paths with them, as well as alert the public to potentially infected locations. In the United States, the White House recently spoke with Google, Facebook, and other tech companies about potentially using aggregated location data captured from Americans' mobile phones for public health surveillance of the virus. Several members of Congress subsequently expressed alarm at a potential privacy breach this could represent and asked the president to protect any virus-related data the companies collected from Americans. One American state, Virginia, has just now in August launched a coronavirus exposure notification tool developed by Apple Google, which offers to help public health authorities build up their Bluetooth-based COVID-19 contact tracing apps. It is not only the big tech companies that are building contact tracing apps. Some services are being produced locally by small groups of coders, while others are vast global operations. Opinions differ about the viability of these apps, but they're being rolled out, and many more are likely to come in the next few months. Despite the avalanche of services, we know little about them or how they could affect society. The MIT Technology Review started looking at these apps and asking questions, such as, how many people will download and use them, and how widely used do they have to be in order to succeed? What data will they collect? Who is this data shared with? How will the information be used in the future? Are there policies in place to prevent abuse? The review discovered that there weren't always clear answers to these questions. They collected the information in a single place and created a database to capture details of every significant automated contact tracing effort around the world. You can see the database here. I'm giving you the web address. Perusal of this database shows that the apps are not always voluntary. The data is sometimes used for purposes other than public health, such as law enforcement. The data may be deleted after a period of time, but it is often saved indefinitely. The app sometimes collects more information than is strictly necessary to achieve its aim, and transparency is often lacking. In other words, there is reason for concern from a civil liberties standpoint in many cases. And this is before any analysis of whether policies are being adhered to or whether what happens in theory is different from what happens in practice. You should be active on behalf of your own privacy. User, beware. In conclusion, better understanding can empower us to demand more of tech companies and of our political representatives in regulating these online giants, which the law hasn't caught up with yet. The Congressional Antitrust hearing is a beginning, but the Antitrust Code was written to cope with railroads and steel companies that grew strong enough to raise their prices at will. Legal scholarship is still debating whether those laws apply to Google, Facebook, and other companies that offer services at no monetary cost to the consumer. Right now, despite broader economic pains and a growing backlash to their power, the four American tech superpowers appear to be as close to invulnerable as you can get. Why? Because Amazon, Alphabet, the company that owns Google, Apple, and Facebook, together with Microsoft, have sailed through the lockdown and now account for a quarter of the S&P 500 index by total market capitalization. No one wants to crater the fragile stock market by breaking them up. Not the president and not Congress. It is up to a vocal citizenry to advocate for a world where democratic institutions are sustained, economic inequality is addressed, and the right to privacy is respected. If you want to check out the sources for this webinar or to read further on the topics I discussed, I've included a list here for you in my last two slides of suggestions for readings and my sources. Thank you for watching.